Today, I'm going to be presenting my final presentation on Sojourner Truth's Ain't I Woman speech from 1851. Some main points I will be covering are the introduction, some rhetorical bibliography, the rhetorical situation, the audience, the constraints, some speech information, and the argument analysis. To begin, I'd like to share a segment from Sojourner Truth's Ain't I Woman speech. She said, "Look at my arm. I have plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could head me. And ain't I woman? I could work as much and eat as much as a man when I could get it and bear the lash as well." So, who is Sojourner Truth? She was a formerly enslaved black woman who became a powerful abolitionist and women's rights advocate. Her significance lies in how she used her voice and life story to challenge deeply rooted racism and sexism. So let's dive into the rhetorical biography. Some points throughout Truth's life is that she was born as Isabella Baumfree in 1797 in New York, and she was enslaved with her family. She was sold multiple times and endured physical and emotional abuse. She escaped in 1826 with her infant daughter, and she took the name Sojourner Truth in 1843 to reflect her spiritual mission. Her experiences with injustice gave her a powerful voice for others facing oppression. I'd like to bring up the narrative of Sojourner Truth, which, although she didn't write herself, she confided in her very close friend, Olive Gilbert, about her life story, and he was the one to write this book about her experiences and what she went through. The narrative of Sojourner Truth, written by Olive Gilbert, was through the eyes of Truth, and she spoke at the first National Women's Rights Convention in 1850, and in 1851, at age 54, delivered her famous speech, Ain't I Woman? She worked at the Freedmen's Bureau during the Civil War, and she also gave troops supplies during this time. In general, she overcame the challenges of slavery, illiteracy, penury, prejudice, and sexism in her own lifetime. So, moving on to the rhetorical situation, here are some points. The issues leading to the speech were the problems with women's rights and abolitionism. This speech was held at the Women's Convention in Akron, Ohio in 1851. This was an issue based on racism and sexism because they were a big problem at this time, and she was trying to fight against it, which is why she came out and did her speech. Some rhetorical elements in her speech: she appeals to facts, values, religious beliefs, womanhood, and equality. Some of the opposing arguments were that women are too delicate and African American people are inferior to white people. The resolution through the speech was exposing hypocrisy, asserting strength and intellect, and she fought for women's rights. As Truth deftly criticized not only sexism and racism, but also the racism of her fellow feminists, her speech is now regarded not only as one of the earliest entries in the canon of American feminism, but also an early example of intersectionality more than a century and a half before the term came to prominence. This was written by the History.com editors, and that pretty much is one of her main points of what she was fighting for in her argument during that speech. So, moving on to the audience, who was she targeting? So, positioned to respond. These people were primarily women, activists, reformers, and religious followers, as well as the general public. Moving on to receptiveness to argument, there were divided views on women's and black rights, but it did still inspire many, although many were hesitant when listening to her message. Demographics: primarily women and some men. She wanted to reach out to mainly women to stand up and fight for themselves. Knowledge and beliefs: religious views were challenged, the rights of women were challenged, and the idea of inferiority of Black Americans was challenged. So, the constraints. When talking about social, political, and cultural constraints, there was racism, sexism, and religious norms. The audience constraints. There was resistance to a Black woman speaking publicly because Black women were not accepted at this time, so many were hesitant to listen to her. Consequences of violating norms, risk of dismissal, and the resistance of people hearing her message. The limits on rhetorical choices. There was use of biblical references, repetition, humor, and personal narrative. So, some speech information. The speech that I read was one of the published versions by Frances Gage that came out in 1863. I believe that the first version of the speech didn't come out until 12 years after she presented that speech, so it's kind of hard to say which is the most accurate, but I tried to find the one which was. So this was during the antebellum America in 1851. And antebellum America was a time that was generally considered to be the period before Civil War and after the War of 1812. It was characterized by the rise of abolition and the gradual polarization of the country between abolitionists and supporters of slavery. And lastly, the speech was presented at the Akron Women's Rights Convention in Akron, Ohio. Coming back to the demographics of the audience, I wanted to add that when talking about there were some men there, I remember Truth stating in her speech, she says, that little man in black there, he says women can't have as much rights as men because Christ wasn't a woman. Where did your Christ come from? Where did your Christ come from? From God and a woman? Man had nothing to do with him. So she wanted to point out, like, what is this man talking about? Like, women have to do with everything. And I just wanted to come back and make that a point. So lastly, we have the argument analysis. The key arguments was overall equality regarding Black Americans. The rhetorical devices, there was some repetition, which the name of the speech, Ain't I Woman, that was repeated many times throughout the speech, trying to prove her point. There was irony and religious appeal. I wanted to come to the irony. She was saying that she was denied basic rights as a Black woman, and she argues that Black women don't get the same rights as white women despite being a woman. And effectiveness, she challenges both racism and sexism in simple yet powerful and inspiring terms. To conclude, Sojourner Truth's Ain't I Woman speech challenged the racism and sexism of her time. Her words continue to inspire and fight for equality, showing the power of truth, courage, and voice in shaping history. Thank you. And if you haven't, I provided the video of her speech. It's a reenactment, so if you want to go ahead and watch that, you can. All right, bye.